Hi all, this is Steph Giordano with HSRI. You are watching the National Core Indicators Overview and Review of Pre-Survey and Background Information. So this video is going to take you through about the first half of the background information section. As a reminder, I am entering and showing you questions in the ODESA system, which is our online data entry system. This is where all NCI data eventually end up. For some of you, you'll be entering data directly into ODESA. Others will be entering information on paper surveys, and then the data will be entered later on by someone else. So the background information starts off with some questions about the person's personal demographics and characteristics. We start off with this question BI3, what is the person's zip code? You all will be collecting the zip code as a numeric number, but when it gets entered into the ODESA, what we see is that we click this lookup button, you enter a zip code, and it transforms into this residential category. So metropolitan, urban, suburban, rural. There are about 12 different residential types that it will be transformed into. And this is the data that is analyzed by HSRI and what the states will see when they get their data. So we added this question out of states' interest in finding out whether individuals are experiencing services slightly differently based on their residential setting. Question BI4 is about the person's date of birth, person's gender, person's race and ethnicity. This used to be two separate questions. We now have this as one question, and it is a check all that apply as it has been in the past. BI7 is whether the person has a legal appointed guardian or conservator. You'll notice that there are a few different yes responses here. So yes, the person has a limited guardianship, full guardianship, or yes, you know that the person has a guardian or conservator, but you're unsure as to whether the person has limited or full guardianship over the individual. So if any of these yes responses are checked off, we're going to then go and find out question BI8, whether the guardian is the person's family, friend, an employee of the state, or a guardianship agency, or has some other relationship to the individual. We ask about marital status and then added a couple of questions about parenthood, so whether the person has a child, and if so, whether the child is under 18, and or if the person has a child who is over 18. What you may have just noticed is that if you are entering information into the ODESA, you have all of the logic checks really and skip patterns are built right into the system. So if you check off no, then that not applicable checks off automatically for you. And if it's that yes for under 18, BI10A will open up. And this again is only for individuals who have a child under 18, whether the child lives with that person. BI11 asks whether the person has been diagnosed with an intellectual disability, and if so, what level of ID. This question and all of these highlighted in yellow are really, really important information to have as accurate as possible. These data are used for risk adjustment when we do our analysis, which essentially means that when we do the analysis and we make comparisons between states and against the NCI average, we want to ensure that any differences that we're seeing come about are not due to the personal characteristics of individuals in the state, but due to something larger, more at a systems level that's causing differences in how people experience services between states. So BI11A, again, is the level of ID, and we do want to find out from records what that level of ID is. If you cannot determine the level of ID, but do know that the person has been diagnosed with an intellectual disability, you use that 5 response. Question 12 is about what other conditions are noted in the person's record. For each of these questions or responses, we do have 3 different response options, so no, yes, and don't know. And it's really important that there is a check mark on one of these response options for each of the categories that we ask about. BI12A is what health conditions are noted in the person's record, and again, you have that no, yes, and don't know response. And again, very, very important to have all of this information collected for each of these types of conditions. And also for both BI12 and 12A, we are looking for conditions that are noted in the person's record, so that have been diagnosed by a medical professional. We ask about the person's primary language, preferred means of communication, and just a note here that we do recognize that most people will use more than one communication style, but we're looking for whatever is the most frequently used preferred means of communication. And then how you describe the person's mobility, so the person moves without aids, has some assistance, so uses aids sometimes, or uses a wheelchair independently, for example, or that the person is non-ambulatory. And now we have some questions about healthcare. So we start out by asking whether the person has a primary care doctor or a primary care practitioner. We then ask some questions about routine medical exams and checkups. So when was the last annual physical exam? BI18 was the last dental exam. This one is really important. We want to make sure that we're not capturing the person going into a dentist or ER because of an emergency pain kind of situation, but that the person is going in for regular dental visits, cleanings, and checkups. BI19 is when was the last eye exam or vision screening. BI20 was the last time the person had a hearing test. 21 was whether the person had a flu vaccine in the past 12 months, and that could be for any type of flu strand. BI22 and 23 are the person's weight and height. And so this information we use to calculate the person's BMI. And this is information that states have been really interested in and using for a number of different purposes, including just making sure that people are having a healthy lifestyle, but also looking at correlations between BMI and medication use, physical activity, and some other indicators that are located throughout the survey. BI24 is whether the person uses nicotine or tobacco products, and that does include e-cigarettes. BI25 and 26, these are both grayed out in the ODESA because we did not put in gender or age. So if the person is female, you're going to find out the last time she had a Pap test. If the person is female and 40 or over, when was the last mammogram? BI40 or 27, is for anybody who is 50 and older, when was his or her last colorectal cancer screening? We ask if the person has seizure disorder, how often do seizures occur, and that one response is that the person has a seizure disorder, but they are completely controlled. And then the next set of questions are about medications. So does a person take medications to treat mood disorder, anxiety, and or psychotic disorders? We have a little bit of a description about what types of medications we're asking about. As a note here, this does not have to be specifically psychotropic medications, but any kind of medication that may be being used to treat these disorders. If it's a yes, we want to try and find out how many medications the person is taking for those specific disorders. And then BI30 asks separately whether the person takes medication for behavioral challenges, and if so, how many. BI31 is asked for everyone, so does this person have a behavioral plan? And we give a little bit of a description about what we're looking for in terms of behavioral plan. Then we get into questions about the person's residence. So BI32 is how long the person has lived at his or her current home. For those of you who are familiar with the survey, you may notice that BI33 is a little bit more put together than it has been in past years. So we tried to create sort of buckets for each type of residential setting, as well as add a little bit of description for settings that we know may have caused a little confusion in the years past. So starting with ICFs or other institutional settings, including nursing homes. We're asking if a person lives in an ICF, and if so, you want to just try and get the most appropriate bucket, so 4 to 6 people, 7 to 15 residents with disabilities, or 16 or more. Or group residential settings, so this is most often in group home, and again we have the residence buckets, number of residence buckets, so 2 to 3, 4 to 6, or 7 to 15. If the person lives on their own, in their own home or apartment, maybe owned or rented, or could be sharing with roommates. And so this is oftentimes can be included in a shared living situation. The 10 responses that the person lives with a parent or a relative. And the next set of residential types are for foster home, host homes, or other types of settings. There is a slight difference between the code 11 and 12, so both are for foster care or host home. That 11 coding is if the person is living with another individual with a disability in a foster care or host home. And the 12 responses that the person lives in foster care or in a host home, but he or she is the only person there with a disability. BI 33A is whether the person's residence is owned or controlled by a provider agency. So that no response includes a no, that the residence is not owned or controlled by a provider agency. Also that the person owns, rents, or is living with family or friends. BI 34 is only applicable to individuals who are living in an ICF, in a specialized institutional facility, or a group home. We want to know whether it's publicly or privately operated. Question BI 35 is trying to get at those new HCBS regulations, so whether the person is named on the lease, if the person owns his or her own home. BI 37 is whether the person's ever lived longer than a year in an institutional setting such as a nursing home or ICF. And just a note here, longer than a year, we're looking for one full consistent year, not that the person over their life has spent intermediate time in institutional settings and it's accumulated to equaling over a year. And if this is a yes, we want to try and find out whether it's an ICF public setting, private setting, or a nursing home, and this is a check all that apply. And finally, for residents, we want to know what amount of paid support the person receives at home. And that takes us to the end of our third video. The next video is going to walk us through the end of the background information settings, starting with questions about the employment and other daily activities. Thank you for listening.